So this is me. I've been doing software since forever. I started out in C++, doing client-server stuff, and then I found this hobby called dog agility, which is obstacle courses with dogs. Because every talk I've given here has had dog agility in it somehow.
And we've been watching you build that app for 3 years.
And that's what got me hooked on doing web stuff, because I wanted to share training tips with other people in my sport. So I created this blog called the Agility Nerd Blog back in 2004, which is a real long time for a blog. And this is kind of the last recent incarnation of it. It's very bootstrappy because I'm no designer by any stretch of the imagination. Here's what it looked like just before I refreshed it. And the things I kind of wanted to bring up about it that might be interesting is all the content is flat files, statically generated. All this is server-side generated. It's all, there's some jQuery in here, maybe. I don't even remember. So there's stuff like this, recently read, which is generated at runtime for each page. This is a Discus feed from the Discus comment stuff. All these tags are generated up through a script. I run a Python script each time I push to figure out what all the tags are and build the cloud and cache it to a flat file. There's just so much hellish stuff to make this blog work.
2004, man. Rolling your own blogs.
That's how you did it, right? But it built up to, I'm up to 800 blog posts, about 1,600 total pages because of the tags pages and all the categorization and all that stuff. And 12,000 people follow it, so that's pretty cool. Why would I want to change? 3 big reasons. Authoring for it is a hellish nightmare. The platform has been pretty much dead since the late 1990s. The guy who created this platform, it's like, yeah, and I'm done. He said, and I'm done. Right? So it's just me and some folks in Japan apparently who are still using this plugin.
What is the platform?
I will get there in 2 seconds. And the performance is not that hot because every page load requires a lot of server horsepower. So let's talk about authoring. So on the left, my right, is what I've got, and what's desired is on the other side, right? So edit in Emacs, they're flat files, there's some metadata, and then HTML. So I'm writing raw HTML. That is so much fun, right? So I hate it. I just hate it. I hate having it. I can do it, and I can use Emmet and all that stuff, but you're still writing a lot of HTML. And I'm like, I could just post on Facebook. It would just be easier.
So
I post on Facebook.
What's wrong with WordPress?
It's a different circle of hell. So I'd like to post from my phone, just like I do for Facebook, right? But I would kind of like to go to a new file format like Markdown. And all the cool kids now are using what's called MDX, which is Markdown plus JSX. So it's basically a Markdown file, and you put React components in it. So if you're writing a tech blog, imagine if you could show off your latest React project in the blog page, because you can just write your Markdown and say, import my fancy component, and you just drop your component in, and it renders it. Oh, that would be so sweet. I had no preview. I had to manually optimize all my images. FTP deploy? Yes! all of these are friction points that made me not want to blog, right? So for the last 2 or 3 years, they're like a dozen blog posts as opposed to 1 a week. I was good for 1 a week for a long time. So I want to go somewhere where I can do it on my phone, I can upload images, and the platform is just going to optimize them, make the 20 different sizes, do all the goodness. And I want to just git push, right? We're probably a bunch of web developers here. You get used to continuous deployment where you can just I commit and it's live. I want that too. So the platform is in a Perl script called Blossom. It's a whole bunch of custom plugins, also written in Perl. My favorite write once language. Blossom. Like the TV show or the flower. So a bunch of scripts, and since it's actually painful I'm stuck on the same VPS because it's got all these custom Perl modules, lovingly hand installed, and so I'm stuck. I'm on long-term service and it's expiring, and I want to be gone. Right? And it's expensive, VPS. I'm paying for this VPS. Why nowadays, right? So I want to use the cool stuff. I want to use React. I like to just deploy in static hosting, which is free and fast. We're on a CDN. Performance-wise, yeah, I've got an Nginx cache sitting in front of all this, so once they hit the page, it's fast. But I'm too lazy to write the script to crawl the site, to preload the cache. It's a blog. It's not my job, right? There are plenty of people here who are pro web developers who are like, I could solve that problem. I don't want to solve that problem. What I want is something that when you hit the page, it's like instantaneous, right? So you'll never guess what I chose. I chose Gatsby. Wow.
No way.
And it was the title. It's open source, and it's got a commercial model for supporting it, so they have real-time, full-time developers. It's really a nice project.
It's because they gave you a T-shirt, isn't it?
That's actually a nice thing. They have a good community in that you do your first pull request, and they give you enough money to get a free T-shirt. You give them like 5 pull requests, you get like $20 in swag, whatever. I don't know the numbers, but
Very cool.
it's a great model where they're like, we actually care that you did something for the project. So it's pretty neat.
Or they're crowdsourcing their own process.
Yeah. So here's all the goodness that Gatsby gives me. I won't read every single one, but it's basically I can do the things I want. I could create files on a CMS like the WordPress CMS or any of the cool kid headless CMSs out there. I'm just going to stick with my flat files, right? Because I've got 800 of them. I can finally get hot reloading and preview. I don't have to deploy to the server, refresh. Oh shit! And then redeploy and refresh. And oh, I got to clear the Nginx cache. Oh, hellish nightmare. Git deploys. It's the latest cool kid stuff, right? React.js with GraphQL. Static hosting anywhere. And what I'm going to show you next is, well, I think some of the coolest part is it pre-fetches pages that the user might visit. So subsequent page loads are, millisecond, microsecond possibly, crazy fast. So let's look at it in action. I took the time to come up with a new design that I think looks a lot better. And it lets me use photos now, because now it's easy to upload photos. I don't have to optimize all these darn photos, right? So let's look at speed first. So there's Lighthouse, which is a desktop Chrome extension.
That's Zoom.
Zoom? Just too small?
There you go. Perfect.
So I wanted to keep some of the screen there. Thank you. Let's run it. So it's going to simulate a number of conditions to kind of give you some high level, like it's good or it's bad kinds of things. So it's giving me green stuff, which is all pretty good. And actually they would all be a lot higher, except what my problems are, I'm using Discus. I'm hitting third-party services, which violate all sorts of rules. Like Discus doesn't use alt tags on any of its images. It does document write to put stuff into the DOM. It does like...
Wait a minute, does everyone call it Discus?
I call it Discus.
I thought it was
Discuss.
I don't know. I've only ever said it in my head.
Discuss. Okay. But look at this. Progressive web app. That's pretty cool. You don't have to do anything special. And basically you get a React app. You can save to your desktop on your phone, whatever they call it. Save the app to your home screen. You click it, it launches it. It's a progressive web app. So all the pages are cached on your phone, which for my clientele is actually really good, because one of the things about my website is it has courses that people use to practice. And a lot of these practice places are out in the middle of fields where there's terrible cell reception. So they could actually just bring it up. They've got everything they need to practice. So let's, it's really hard with these classes on this screen. Okay. So what I want to show now is watch as I scroll. As I go past links, you'll see all sorts of magic happy stuff is happening back there, right? That's actually preloading all these images. So you see that page came up. Basically,
that's a lot of errors you just closed out there.
Those weren't errors.
There was a bunch of red network
there were red there?
fetches of some sort.
Oh, there were probably some.
They're probably canceled.
It's assert authority. Thank you, Netlify. That's awesome. Not me. Not my bug.
Right.
So any of these things that we've been to, oh, this is the bad page. I had this page has literally hundreds and hundreds of entries on it, so it's a bad one.
Did you practice this?
So it does load, but it always throws an error. See, it doesn't show all the entries on it.
Oopsie.
So But a lot of it, but you can see how fast it is. I'm just randomly picking links.
Is it really random?
Am I really random?
Yeah.
If you want to pick one yourself, you can come pick a link. The beauty of it is the React app is doing all this for me. I didn't write any code to do that. It's all prefetching. So it is sweet. One kind of a nice thing is, let me clear the cache here. You notice the images blur up. So it actually loads a really low resolution image to get content on the page really fast, and it then backloads the images.
How did you just reset the cache?
Command Shift R.
Okay, how
can
do you
see
do
the
that on a Windows machine?
Control Shift R.
Control Shift R.
Okay, and so that was all the goodness. So I think it's a big win, right? This is a way better website for users, hopefully, assuming the content's any good, than what we had before. So this is right off the Gatsby website, obviously, because I'm now artiste. How's this all working, right? The general notion in Gatsby is these things called data sources. They can be anything. Here it gives examples of content management systems, markdown files, raw data files. It grabs them all at build time, it sucks all that data in, and starts up a GraphQL server. So this GraphQL server only runs during development. There's no server when you deploy. It's just running the whole time you're developing. It collects all this data, you run your GraphQL queries against it, and it builds a data layer. So it's basically a Redux store full of all the data that it just queried from these data sources. Then it generates the server-side renders the HTML, gives you the CSS, and generates the React app. And so now you've just got a bunch of flat files in a directory called like public. And I could use my FTP technology to shoot that up to my old server. Or you could do something fancy like a Git deploy and trigger your host to say, oh, he just deployed, he just did a Git push. I'll grab the files and build them on the server myself and deploy them. So that's the key things to take away from this. Many data sources, query them through GraphQL, generate the output files, then you can host them someplace else. You don't need a fancy server, you just need a stupid server. So how do you install it? npm install Gatsby CLI that gives you a command called Gatsby. There's a whole bunch of starters out there that help you get started with like pre-wire stuff together. So here's like the blog starter. So you do Gatsby new, name your directory, the starter, then you go in there and you've got a directory full of files ready to roll, right? So let's create content, right? If I've done that, I'm actually ready to create some content. So this is an MDX file. Here's the markdown, what's called front matter. Is a term I didn't know until I started learning about Gatsby. It's basically key value pairs, right? Me, the date, description, a list. This is how you do a list in YAML, and a title and an image. Then here I've got my text, and there's this weird React component sitting in here, right? A thing called multi-link. One of the key things in my site is it's kind of a reference site. So I would, it's kind of like tagging, but it's more regexy in that if I had, say this tag said the word front in it, any file that had the word front in it would automatically get linked up to here. So I can, over time, add new content. If I name the files certain ways, they'll automatically be linked into all my old articles too. So people who are interested in, like a term in my hobby is a front cross. It's a certain movement you make. And they can, any article I write with the title that's got front in it will hook up all those together. And that people really love that feature. And this lets me write a little React component that wires right into my markdown and give me the same functionality. This is what's kept me from moving. Blossom had this goofy plugin that would do this. And I'm like, what can I do? And it turned out React was the answer. So that's pretty awesome. Cool. So let's develop. Gatsby develop gives you a server with hot reload, hot module replacement and preview. And build gives you, give me the files, right? I won't take you through it, but there's a little great diagram on the site that talks about all the different build steps. We're cool, we don't need that. So let's talk about data sources, right? That was the top of our diagram. So these are many of the kinds of things you might want to suck data from, right? for instance, like most people think about blogs, you're like, oh, I just got my blog post, right? But it could be, what if I got an Instagram feed? I want to also include my latest Instagram photos, or any tweet that's got the hashtag agility nerd in it. I want those to all end up in my blog. You can wire those all in as sources, and then whenever you hit the build button on Gatsby, it'll suck in the latest of all those sources, build all your pages, and dump them out as flat files. So here, let's take a look at the sources. So there's 413 plugins. So they call these plugins. So I feel very comfortable with my old plugin model. Now there's new things called plugins. So here's like one for Instagram. Remark is just a markdown thing. Craft CMS, yet another CMS. So there's whole slews of Google Photos. Get stuff from Trello. Anything you want. We were talking before. Maybe you might want to write a custom one for some in-house project, because it could be an API. It could do a database query. Those are all possible sources. So we've got these sources, and we want to configure them. I pulled all my source into the slides instead of going to the VS Code. Hopefully it'll be less distracting. So Gatsby has this thing called Gatsby config, and that's where you basically say, hey, I'm configuring this stuff, right? So you export an object. Here's some metadata on my site, but the plugins are what we care about. For my system, I'm using the Gatsby source file system. Guess what it does? It reads the file system. Uploads is where I'm going to upload my photos, and blog source is where my blog posts are. So given these, when Gatsby runs, it rips through those directories all the way down to the roots and brings back all the files and says, hey, there's a file here at this location, a file at this location. This is a markdown file, this is a JPEG file, this is a PNG file, and so on. There are other types of plugins called transformation plugins, and the one I'm showing here is that MDX plugin. So that's what says, hey, take a file that ends in MDX or MD, a markdown file, and do your React magic on it. If there's any weird components in there, turn them into HTML or instantiate them in some magical way. So I don't have to do anything. I don't have to import all those components all over the place. I just can use them, and this guy will turn them into real boys, in the Pinocchio sense. So similarly, here I'm processing images. Any images that comes across in all this, any images within an MDX file specifically, let them scale up to 2,000 pics wide, rip out their title and alt tag if there is one in the markdown, and generate a whole bunch of permutations of them for me. So that's what all this does. So at this point, I've got data, right? I've got data. Let's, when you're running Gatsby Develop like I am right now, you get the cool little GraphQL endpoint here, and our man Todd, who is not here tonight, gave a talk a year ago maybe on GraphQL. So check out the videos on that, because this is like all I'm going to tell you about it. Here, all these guys here, I call them sources, I don't know what they're really called, are data from those data sources. So Gatsby went through them all and said, here's all the data. Then you can write a query here and run it, and it's picking out these different fields. Like I'm interested in the slug, which is the path. And then in the front matter, I want the title, the date, and the tags for whatever reason. Those are the things I chose. And so here's the results, right? So here's one called Weave Safety in One Photo. Here's all the tags for it, and so on. So you would use this tool to figure out what's the data I need to build my pages, right? And then you can tweak it. It's got this really cool, you can do all sorts of filtering. Like here I'm filtering for date, and it can't be empty and it can't be draft.
And you can build a lot of that just with that.
You can just click those things and it just builds
yeah,
it. It is
it's very
so
cool.
And what's even nerdlier is they've added this feature to write out actual code. So you could build GraphQL-based components for Gatsby by just copy-pasting from there, which is pretty cool.
So this isn't for average users?
I don't know. I mean, I learned it by going through the tutorial. I'm not like a freaking rocket scientist. I mean, do it.
It looks a lot more complicated than WordPress.
It is, but it's also doing a lot more than WordPress, right? It's letting you say, I'm sucking in data from all these sources. WordPress is like, here's what the architect of your content management system set up as your all the things, which for some people is the right answer. But other people building more cooler, differenter stuff, it just depends what you need, right? There's different tools.
You can use WordPress as a source.
You can use WordPress also as a source.
Okay.
If you really wanted to. So now we've got data, we know how to query it. God, let's finally make some pages, right? Isn't the whole point of this to make a blog? This is exhausting, just because of Mark's questions.
I was going to say.
Oh, no, I was looking at you. So there's another file involved called Gatsby Node, and that's like where you do your work. So Gatsby gives you export a function called, guess what? Create pages. What do you think it does? That's where you create all your pages. And inside there, for every page that you want to build dynamically, you say, create page, and you give it the content, and it goes and builds it. So let's look at that. So here's our Gatsby node, and what you want to do, and this was actually something that is probably in the docs now, but wasn't when I was there, when I first started this, is at this level, when you're creating the pages, you want the simplest query that will get all your pages. Like you could imagine, hey, I should query for everything every page would need. And you could put that in this query and make a big giant, if you have a dozen data sources, and you want tags, and you want categories, and you want blog posts, you could end up with a multi-page long query, and it would be really hard to maintain. So what I think the recommended approach is just pick out what you need to get you to the single item. Then in your template, which I'll show you in a minute, then you do the query to get all the data to render the page. So there's like, get me all the pages, then for each page, build each page. So let's see how that works. So here I'm picking out from my MDX files. This is the same query as before, right? Anything that's done in draft state, get me the location of it, the title, date, and tags. This little fancier guy down here also pulls out all the unique tags, because I'm going to create a separate page for each tag too. Right? I want to glue all front pages together. So that's the query part. Then, I'm sorry, let me go back. So this gives me a result, right? So I can say, hey, GraphQL, do it. It puts it in a result. And then I want to get my posts out of that, which are all MDX edges. That's a list of pages. So I loop over them. For each post, I'm getting the one before me and the one after me, because the blog has those little arrows at the bottom, right? Previous, next, previous, next. And now you do that. And then here I do create a page, right? And it just takes three things. The URL, what's my React component I want to use to render this page? That's the template. So you're right in React right now. You can just say, oh, and I want this page to look like this. And you give it the component. And then you give it the props, right? So here I'm giving it the slug, previous, and next. So I'm giving it just the minimum so I can find this dude, right? Okay, so now let's talk about the template, right? We've got our data, we've got an individual page, now let's render it. So components could just be a plain React component. You don't need GraphQL at this point, right? If that query had enough data in it, you could just hand it off and render it. It's just passing props to a React component. But Gatsby lets you also do a query in each component. So let's look at that. So the properties, was also not at all obvious initially. Those three, I passed three props. Let's go back. I passed slug, previous, and next. Those come in as, you can use any or none of any one or all of those in your query. Here I'm using slug, and I'm saying, hey, get me the sites info. Look in MDX, where the slug is this dude, so it's a specific URL. And now I'm pulling out all the really interesting stuff. So give me an excerpt. Ooh, I said it right that time. I had trouble saying that word. An excerpt, this is something they're giving you automatically. It basically says, give me the first 100 characters, or whatever the magic number is, right out of your markdown. I don't have to do anything, I just say excerpt. Title, description, tags, this is a list, me, the author. Boom, image. So I'm pulling out that image, And this little magical syntax here says, give it to me in a fluid, so multiple sizes, and give it to me a WebP version in case the browser supports that. Otherwise, it generates the WebP and the JPEGs, but the React app will do the right sniffing to use the right stuff. So I don't have to mess with images anymore. It's a wonderful thing.
Is the React app actually doing that, or is it like one of those? What's that the image feature where you can have a bunch of different sources?
It uses a picture element. It renders it as a picture element.
Okay.
So it's got all the size break. The picture element has different size
Okay, yeah, the
breakpoints in it.
source. What do they call that?
Source set.
Source set. Yeah.
But I don't know if WebP is part of that.
Because technically, the output of Gatsby isn't React, right?
It's a rehydrated React app. So it's server-side rendered, and it hydrates when it runs. It's the real deal, baby. It's not just HTML.
I'll run something by you then.
Okay.
But go ahead.
So here's now look, it's a React component. If you don't like React components, you can use functions, right? Whatever. I don't know any different. I'm not a React expert. So our props came in, but now look, there's this do data in here, which is the result of the query, right? So it automatically wires in the query results into your props. So now, a bunch of code has been deleted to like pluck out all the different pieces of the payload that I care about. But now it's just a React component. So there's a layout. It sets SEO, so that's in the head of the HTML. So it's like your OG image is this, the description of the site is this, the description of the page is that. All the metadata basically gets set by this component. Here's a breadcrumb, right? What's my path? Just so you know what in case I've lost you guys here. Let's image, breadcrumbs, title, date, body of the dude. This is the body of the article. Related articles, a bunch of lists, tags, add this, third party, discuss.
Thank
Image, discuss.
you.
So you kind of look through here. Here's our H1. It uses MDX front matter title, right? So it's just ripping the properties out into this template. And so I'm building this whole site with I think like 4 templates and like 4 different queries, and it builds 1,600 pages, right? So it's like rock on, it's pretty easy. So not only do you can make as many as I referred to, and you can bring in any third parties you want, right? It's just React. It's just React event. So any React goodness you want, you can do client-side routes. If that's something you want to add your own data, your own routes that aren't server rendered, they could be all client-side routes too, as well. Let me show you one other component just so you know I'm not lying to you about. So here is my tag cloud dude. He's got a static query in him. Oh, I can make that bigger. How's that? So here, here's like a higher order component. You don't have to use this. They also have hook-based versions if you prefer. You say, hey, hit all the MDX, group the tags by their field value, and give me a count. So this is an aggregate. It basically says, get all the names of the tags and count them. So I'll get back 2 values. One is the tag name and how many. That's what. This is not obvious that that's what that does, but the group is the aggregation magic. It hands that result off into the render prop, and what do you know? It's just it's an unordered list, iterating all of them, sort them alphabetically, filter out any. I have some bad tags in there, so I have a filter that gets rid of the bad ones of those. And then go over each tag, create an LI, and then here's the Gatsby link component, which does that magic preloading stuff. So when that's rendered, it's doing all that fetching in the back end for you. So I think, I have the right thing in there.
Do you always use the high contrast? Or
I
is
only
it
use it
just
for presentations. My eyes aren't quite
It's a
that
good
bad
move,
yet.
man.
That's what I'm talking about.
So here's an example, so I use it in my tags, so I have a tags page, but I also, when I introduced this feature 10 years ago or whatever, I had a different plugin here, and now I just plug in the React component to do it. So plugin power, there's 1,400 plugins, I guess 400 of those are the sources I showed you already. But so there's kind of 2 sides to the plugin world, right? There's during generation, like we saw the one I used where I convert Markdown in MDX to just plain old HTML. But my RSS feed is also generated with a plugin. It just writes a query that says, get me the 10 most recent things by date and render them this way. Image processing, as you saw, I use Sass for all my CSS, because I'm so not into the CSS and JS yet. Generate my sitemap, robots.txt. I'm using a bunch more, but these are all server-side, right? These are all generated statically, and then you just ship them. On the client side, there's Google Analytics. Oh, there's search. Search is an interesting one. So I'm using Algolia Search, which is awesome. It's just freaking awesome. My old search was a form post to another CGI script, so it was horrible. But now I can just type stuff in. It does, italicized of the matches. It does all the goodness. It's freaking amazing. This is a two-part kind of plugin. There's at build time, it builds a big JSON payload of here's all the pages, here's all their content, here's all their tags, and it uploads it to the Algolia server. So that all happens at build time. Then runtime in the client, it just runs this little widget. It's just a React component that does all this search, right? So it's just making a bunch of AJAX requests and getting the results that you see there. So that's kind of a combo of a client. I should have made a middle ground here. Comments, as we saw, crash monitor, you saw my roll bar, it pounds on roll bar as you do anything on the page. That's for crash monitoring. And it's got offline mode, as I described before, because it's all there. So now we've got stuff. We got files on disk, right? Just deploy them. So you could FTP, like I said, or I'm using a Netlify, which is one of the new cool kids in the block. But there's Zeit, that's how I pronounce it. Maybe I'm saying it wrong.
No, you got it.
Now I'm a suspect of every word. Maybe I'm suspect.
Well, I say Zeit in my head also.
But you can host just on GitHub pages, right? Any of these free services. Because my site's relatively small. I think images are probably 100 meg of images, and I don't know.
Is there a reason you use Netlify over, say, like GitHub pages?
It was like easy. They had in the tutorial, I think it says, and now hosted on Netlify. And I said, I will type the words. And it's turned out okay. Of course, the day I went
Are you on a pay tier? Or
free.
Free tier?
Free.
That's cool.
The day I deployed, within an hour of posting to Facebook, they had a CDN outage. I was like, thank you very much. Hey, all my readers, this awesome new site, you can't get to it.
Switch over to that GH Pages branch.
GH Pages would have worked, but who knows? So as I said, it just triggers by my git commit, right? So I can just commit it, no FTP, none of that crazy stuff. It builds it on their server, they generate the files, and then they deploy them for me, so I don't have to know how or where they deploy.
Are you in the free tier of Algolia too?
Yes. The free tier on Algolia requires non-commercial, if I remember correctly, and so I fit that. Cool.
What does that mean? Does that just mean like your repository can't be private?
No, it can be private, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it just you have to. I keep the powered by Algolia as part of the deal, which I'm happy to do. It's a great service. It's really nice. So
when you deploy, do you deploy it like you mentioned, like 100 megs of images? Do you deploy all 100 megs each time then?
I cheat.
FTP,
I cheat in two ways. That's an excellent question. All my old stuff, all my old images, are all served on a subdomain, data@agilitynerd.com. So that will never change. Those guys are there forever. All the new stuff does get deployed each time.
So every deploy takes a little bit longer?
Yeah, it's also, and you can use git LFS, so your repository isn't massive by having the images in. I think it just keeps like a tag. It's some Git magic that I learned about. So we were talking before about what might you use Gatsby for, right? Blogs are perfect. Anything where it's read many, write occasionally is a perfect example, right, to use for this. Anything you can pre-generate. But there are people who are doing kind of interesting things where they say, well, my data changes like every morning, so we just rebuild overnight, and it sweeps up the new data, and is fresh for the users in the morning. Or my site to deploy on Netlify takes like 10 minutes, which bothers me a lot. But it takes like 2 minutes for me to build locally, but it takes 10 minutes for them to build and deploy my 1,600 pages. So that makes me a little sad. But so if that was your world, you could conceivably deploy as often as every 10 minutes, right? You could just, if there's something you have to pick up, that may be a model. But they also, the hybrid notion, which is kind of what I'm doing, right? Some things are local, some things are pre-generated, and it all gets worked out on the React client. But as I said, kind of the model for thinking about Gatsby is, yeah, just get some new data, just regenerate it. Just do it. It's so fast, it's so easy. It's not like a big deal like my old site was. Oh, we're going to deploy today. It's a thing. It just happens. It's sweet. But wait, there's more Gatsby. This whole slide deck is Gatsby slide deck. Whoa! This is, I'm almost done. So there's this project MDX deck, where I basically give it one file, deck.mdx, and it just has all the slides are in it.
Nice.
I can put in any kind of markup I want, including React components, which I'm not doing because I'm lazy. And then I just push to my GitHub repository. It uses the same Netlify hook. And so as you can see, I'm running this on Gatsby on Netlify right now. So it, as you can just push it pushes in. This one pushes in like a couple minutes. It's live almost instantly because it's one file and some images. It pushes up some images too. So that has been my adventure, and I highly recommend it. And that is my boy Snap wearing my t-shirt. So thank you. Questions, far away.
Steve, don't disconnect. I just wanted to mention that to you.
Don't disconnect?
Don't unhook the laptop.
I won't touch anything. Okay.
What's the dev experience like if you have to get all this data, you have 1,600 pages, and you want it to like start previewing them but still make development changes? Is there like a button that says, or like a command that says load data, and then you just get all the auto refresh?
Yes.
It depends, like if it's a file system thing, it's got a file system watcher. So as soon as I save it, auto generates. But there's a config you can give Gatsby where you can post.
If it's an external data source, you can enable a little flag when you launch Gatsby Develop, and then you go to a separate terminal and you do a little curl to your URL, which is like localhost 8080 or something, and it'll automatically rerun all of the stuff in the Gatsby config to refetch that data.
So it still takes a little while, but in dev I haven't found. I mean, I'm only using Markdown, so it was handy. But with 1,600, it seems to keep track of some dependencies in some ways. So like it'll regenerate all the tags files that were tagged by that Markdown page. So it may generate like a dozen or 2 dozen pages as I added it up.
So back to what you were saying earlier when I was asking the question about like it's not really rendering a React app. So I recently worked on a website where I built everything in Gatsby, and it's running off an external database that has like Airtable, so there's an API there, there's a Gatsby plugin for it, and like when I went through all the tutorials, it was like, yeah, write all your GraphQL in each thing, but instead what I did is I just created a bunch of hooks separately that fetch the like 8 different data sets that any of my components might need, and then I just use those as hooks.
Imported them as files?
Yeah, so I just say like, dates equals use dates, and that automatically executes a query and formats the data for me and sends it back. And I can do that without having to have any sort of nested architecture because, I mean, these are only going to get run at build time. So after I build them and deploy them, they are no longer fetching at all.
Right, sure.
So I guess what I was asking earlier is like, well, that's clearly not producing my React component because it's no longer fetching data, even though I have the hook right there inside the component fetching the data. So I have a thing that says this variable equals go fetch all this data, but that's not happening in my static site.
Right.
So how is it, if it's actually a rehydrated React application or a bunch of React components, how is it figuring out that my thing is making an Ajax
I
call
have
of some
no
sort?
idea. First of all, I have no idea. I would
Fast answer you could get.
No, I mean, I don't know. I would speculate the reason it works for the GraphQL-ish scenarios is because I think it actually is, it's pulling that data out of this little Redux store, and I'm sure it's writing it, I haven't looked at
Yeah, all of
these
it's
files.
set up. I mean, I've
It's
got it
gotta
all
be written
set
out
up
into
in
JSON.
the Gatsby config. Like, I have to identify each and every table and its dependencies and all sorts of stuff like that. But anyways, okay.
Sorry, I
don't
don't
know.
know.
Perfect
I just know
answer.
what I read, which was, it rehydrates the React component. I'm like, that's all I need to know.
What does that mean?
Oh, good question. So you get a
Come on,
bunch.
Mark.
Did you see that?
He's gonna school you now.
I'm gonna try because I don't really know. So if someone knows better, please
No,
stop
you
me.
know. Go ahead, tell them.
I'm gonna try. So it ships out what effectively gets written out as plain HTML, and then it says, "Oh, I'm gonna run across the DOM and try to connect up all these DOM elements to my React components." That's my understanding of rehydration. So then it's effectively running. So you have your DOM. It's displayed. The React does its magic by saying, "Oh, this LI, I know that belongs to this LI in the React app itself." It wires them all up. Some magical way, I don't know how. But then at that point, you can interact with those elements through the regular React mechanism. So that's my layman's model of what rehydration means.
I mean, that's fairly close to, especially if you look at like early server-side React and now Next.js, which is really, it's server-side and it's rendering an HTML page so you get it immediately. Or if a search engine comes crawling, it gets it immediately. But once you're there, it can hand it all off to the JavaScript application. So your landing page is generated immediately.
Right.
But then the rest the client-side router can take over, do your Ajax stuff, whatever. Like, what does it matter as long as the page you landed on loaded immediately? The rest of it's
You
going
can
to...
start reading content immediately,
Right,
but then it becomes interactive once the app
But
is rehydrated.
I don't think
Gets juicy
Gatsby
again.
works that way.
I don't know.
Because if you look at the rendered thing, you get, like, if you have pages, it gets converted into directories for each and every page with an index HTML, a separate lone index HTML. And it doesn't seem to be, I don't think it's a single page application in the end
I do not
at
know.
all.
It's your. I do
It's
not
a
know.
progressive web app, though.
You know what, I gotta
That's what
check
it
my
said.
project and
But
see
maybe
if
I'm
it
not
does
getting
that.
Look, what does this Lighthouse say?
I
Lighthouse
saw
said it was
it.
progressive
I gotta
web
run
app,
Lighthouse on my shit, because I
Yeah.
feel like mine's not gonna be it's gonna be all like, what is wrong with you? Why do you hate
Any other
disabled
questions?
people?
Just far away.
What do the sources get hit? You mentioned the Redux, like is an actual Redux store?
They say there's a Redux store. This is at the very limits of my comprehension. But my understanding is they call it create. Oh, let's see. Maybe
We gotta get Kyle Matthews on the
I
line.
think I have. Here we go. So here was the little diagram I didn't show, but they basically say, like, we got some content, YAML. Then it builds, and it says server-side rendering, route-based code splitting, and more, Joe.
And more! Exclamation.
Okay, but then it says data returned by GraphQL goes back in the same exact shape. And I thought this is where they talk about the data, all data is combined in the data layer, which my understanding is a Redux store. Maybe it may or may not be. So I got the
Without
feeling that
having to
once these
travel
queries
across
run,
the
they
network.
all sit there, and that's what's used to build the components. So it doesn't query, it runs all the queries first, builds the data layer, and then it builds all the views. on
That
top of
definitely
the data layer.
happens at build time. Yeah,
Yeah,
without
this
a
is all
doubt.
build
That's
time.
why if you're developing, you actually have to run a separate command to say, hey, go refetch all the external data for me.
So if you had like a giant source, would it then load all of that into memory and then start building pages up?
It's-
My understanding is
not
only what you
memory.
queried for would end up in memory, but it could be a big.
Yeah, it was like, if it was, even if it was like a one field, but there were 10 million of them or something.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I assume it just does that naively.
I also don't think, it definitely doesn't end up in memory. It's static.
Well, right, but during the build process.
During the build,
like,
he's worried like if you
yeah.
had 10 million pages, it takes a
Am I
pretty
gonna
big
use
dev
gigs
box.
and gigs of RAM while it builds, or is it going to like stream it from the source as it builds pages?
I don't think it streams it. I think
Well,
it
that's,
just
that's
grabs
what you build this software for.
It's magic.
You got it.
Embrace it.
it. Embrace the magic.
Embrace the magic. That's what it is. It's just an abstraction for a reason.
Any other questions, or I exhausted you guys? Great. Thank you. Thanks again.
How much do we